the source of my strength. You are the strength of my life. And I lift my hands in total praise to you. I greet you in the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus the Christ, and on behalf of those whom you have elected to serve with you in both work and witness through the national setting of the United Church of Christ. It is my great joy to be with you today. I was so excited about coming here that I have not yet been home from Tel Aviv. Flew straight from Israel to Hartford, Connecticut. First stop to look for a hairstylist. So I didn't look like I'd been on that camel when I came to stand before you today, and the hospitality has been wonderful. I have met great people from this conference. One whom I have the pleasure of serving with in the national setting, Ellie. She was sitting there. I don't know where she went, but I'm so excited to be working alongside her in the national setting. I also have a fond love and great space in my heart for DeVita Foy Crabtree. Yes. Who served as an interim associate minister and friend in the Missouri Mid-South Conference at a time when both were needed. And we tried to keep her, but she said that she had to go. I'm delighted to serve with Davita McAllister as a part of a writing team that's working with our General Minister and President John Dorhauer to create an additional learning resource for the church around white privilege. My joke with him when he asked me to join that writing team was, I've got Black Lives Matter, isn't that enough? But it's exciting work that we're doing. I also want to switch hats just for a minute and put on my pastor hat and use this opportunity to once again thank Old South Church for reaching out to Christ the King, where I am proud and privileged to serve as pastor in Florissant, Missouri, which is 3 miles from Ferguson. At a time of great crisis in our community, Old South showed up with some peace cranes. And it may not seem like much to you, but at a time when we felt like we were all alone, they came as a voice of the church, the wider church, with letters saying, we're praying for you. And with these cranes that had great history of prayer that we hung all over our church for a year. What touched me most was that it was the first time that the cranes had been sent to a church that didn't involve mass shootings or mass killings. And when I asked, why Christ the King for Michael Brown, I was told that the peace cranes were sent because the destruction of racism is so great that it deserved a response. I will always carry that in my heart, and I love you for that. So we have sent delegations and sent those cranes on to Chicago. Not because of one killing, but because of the perpetual killing in the neighborhoods there. We are grateful to have shared your story and to have added ours with it. And we are grateful for that radical act of love at a time when we needed to know we were loved. It has been my great privilege to spend the last 12 days with Kent and Jim and several other denominational and global partners on an immersion trip in the Middle East that will undoubtedly transform both our work and our witness. A trip that was made possible in no small part by your generosity in giving through our church's wider mission offering. Yes, I've only been there 2 months, but they've schooled me on this part. During our time with global partners in Egypt and Beirut and Jordan and Palestine and Israel, we witnessed firsthand the tangible difference our dollars are making in the lives of those who are desperate for hope. In every location, we were reminded of the particular ways OCWM offerings were being used to widen our welcome and give bold testament in regions ravaged by poverty, overpopulation, and war. As I was in my hotel room last night, repacking for the 15th time those 3 suitcases that I'm traveling with, wondering how was I going to get past airport security one more time, I was saddened because the one thing that I forgot to bring back from Palestine was a stone. I wanted to pick up a stone because of what the stone has come to represent in terms of resistance. And when I walk through your doors today, I'm one of those people that blames everything on God when it's good. Traci met me at the door, someone who has served as a missionary there in the past, and said, I have a gift for you, a stone from Palestine. So now my trip is complete. OCWM dollars make possible schools and playgrounds for children in the Palestinian refugee camps in both the West Bank and in Beirut. A playground may not seem like much to us, especially when we're sitting in such a wonderful facility, but for the families that have been dislocated from Palestine, 750,000 of them made refugees in 1948, many of whom now are living in these refugee camps as 2nd, 3rd, and 4th generations, born into occupation. A playground is in itself an act of resistance. A simple playground with colorful swings and slides and soccer balls and kites in the absence of military presence, schools where young children learn and laugh and live and have hope. We met one of our global partners by the name of Sylvia, who is running daycares and first grades and in a building that seems like it ought to be condemned, but is full of so much love. She has electronic classes and a beauty salon. I could have used that yesterday. And in the back, a little concrete slab with trash all around it and branches and wires hanging over it with one swing and a little roundabout merry-go-round and soccer ball. And she called it a playground. A playground where the owner of the building has decided that they can make more money without having the refugee school there. So the building is up for sale and she's looking for property where there is no property. And the only way he would allow her to keep the playground was to charge her an upcharge of going from $300 to $800 for the kids to be able to play. And because of what you have contributed, the United Church of Christ, in partnership with the disciples, the Christian church, were able to fill in the gap so that children can play. In Jordan, we traveled with another of our global partners to within 3/4 miles of the Syrian border, to one of many camps that have become home to the 1.2 million Syrian refugees, many of whom are Christian who have fled Syria. There we provided care packages of basic necessities to families, and we provided dignity care packages, which were care packages of personal hygiene products to the women of the camp, and candy and colorful sunglasses to the young children as a part of a campaign called Color the Desert, an attempt to give the children colorful toys that will stand in contrast to monochromatic landscape in the life of a desert. I did not only see the impact of our ministry in refugee camps, but in universities and seminaries and work programs and social enterprise initiatives that are helping people move towards self-sufficiency every day. And over again, we receive words of deep gratitude for being one of the few ecumenical partners that is bold enough and collaborative enough to provide unrestricted dollars that allow our partners to make the best decisions on how to use the resources. I am so proud and grateful for the witness of the United Church of Christ all over the world, and you should be too. From the water crisis in Flint, Michigan, to the water crisis in the Middle East, from mass incarceration in the United States to illegal occupation in Palestine, OCWM offerings allow us to work in partnership both locally and abroad to accomplish more than any of us can accomplish alone. And you, my friends, are a major part of this witness. The Massachusetts Conference contributed over $800,000 and Connecticut over $600,000 in 2015 to our global witness ministry in the national setting. And on behalf of the wider church, I want to say thank you. Thank you for helping the United Church of Christ continue to provide a bold prophetic witness and widening of God's table with love for all of creation. As much as we do, there is still so much more to be done. And we are hopeful that you will prayerfully consider the difference our dollars are making as you prepare your individual and collective OCWM offerings this year. As people of deep faith, once we see, we cannot unsee. Once we hear, we cannot unhear. As people of faith, we are compelled to act. Please let John know how I did. It is all true, but I just like to add a little laughter. Our text for this morning's message is found in Acts, the 9th chapter. It is the story of Paul's most well-known conversion. I say most well-known because the truth is, if we are open to the witness and the works of God in our lives and in the lives of others, we will experience many conversions along life's path. Please allow me to remind you of what the scripture says in Acts 9, verses 1 through 6, reading from the New Revised Standard Version. Meanwhile, Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogue at Damascus, so that if he found any who belonged to the way, men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now, as he was going along and approaching Damascus, suddenly a light from heaven flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" He asked, "Who are you, Lord?" The reply came, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do." For the moments that remain for me, I'd like to speak with you from the subject, a call to convert. Yes. A call to convert. I must admit, as excited and as grateful as I am for the trip to the Holy Land, I was a little taken aback by this visit to the holy places. It is indeed my first visit there, And I am sure many of you have visited these sites many times, but just in case there are those among us who have not yet made this pilgrimage, let me offer you a reminder that I wish someone had offered me, although I admit I probably wouldn't have listened. These are not the holy places of your Sunday school class. Somewhere between the Sunday school classes of my youth and the simplicity of the Christmas story we shared every year in church and the ruggedness of the journey on the cross and the resurrection story, the church has blinged out Jerusalem. Do you know what blinged out means? It means flashing lights and gold everywhere and diamonds dribbling. The church has blinged out the holy places. I expected to see the sacred simplicity of the life of Jesus. And although the sacredness is present in many ways, we have to look and listen for it through the commercialism that crowds the space. Each time we entered the holy city of Jerusalem through the Damascus gate, I found myself thinking of Saul at that time. I know the road does not look the same, nor did we travel far enough to see the street called straight. The cobblestone streets remain in this replica. And although merchants would have most likely been present during Paul's journey as well, I imagine that they would not have been selling knockoff Polo and Coach bags. And they definitely would have been a little less commercial. But I was still reminded of Saul's conversion on this road called Damascus. I was reminded of Saul's presumptions and of Saul's attentiveness and of Saul's willingness to be changed. And I prayed for myself this awareness and this willingness to change for myself. I prayed that I might become more aware of my presumptions on this journey, more attentive to the many ways God speaks, and more willing to be changed by what God says. In my mindful thought, I remembered that Saul's original intent on his Damascus journey was faithfulness, but his understanding was misguided. Saul was a learned man whose understanding of Scripture was one that had no room for a crucified Messiah. Who wants that? He was devout in his discipleship, but he was stifled in his understanding. Saul understood himself to be doing exactly what God would have him to do. We look back and see that Saul was wrong. Hunting down Christians was clearly not what God had in mind. But Saul really thought that he was right and that his service was right, and it became an obsession for him. So even though he was wrong, he thought he was doing exactly what God wanted him to do. And it wasn't hampered any by the fact that he was already busy doing God's work. You see, often God calls us not when we're sitting around doing nothing, but when we're already trying to follow. Moses and Amos were tending sheep when God called them. Samuel was helping in the temple when God spoke to him. Nehemiah was doing his job when God called him. Sometimes we're in the midst of doing what we believe is right when God shines a light. I confess, God has shone that light on me many times in my short journey. Are there any witnesses out there? I am from Black church, you know. Have there been times on your spiritual journey when God has shown a light that caused you to undergo some theological deconstruction? Has God ever given you an on-the-job conversion? Has God ever changed your understanding in the midst of your doing? Has God ever changed your understanding of the letter of the law by shining the light of God's love on your theological construction? When confronted with an alternative or additional truth, Paul turns aside, meaning he listens. I use this phrase intentionally because new understandings of God require us to turn aside. It reminds me of Moses' burning bush encounter. Scripture tells us that Moses was tending the flock, an everyday thing for him. When he noticed a bush burning that was not consumed, he turned aside, the word says, to see what it was all about. And God did not speak to Moses until Moses turned aside. In my early days, I used to preach that text as though Moses was the answer. But life has taught me that it's quite possible that that bush had been burning all along. See, some of y'all didn't think about it either, did you? We have no way of knowing how long the bush had been burning or how many people had just passed by the bush and assumed it to be business as usual because bushes spontaneously combust in deserts. We have no way of knowing whether others had passed this holy moment without a pause. New understandings of God require our attention. Burning bushes are all over this world. Burning bushes. Not the flames that get our attention. The everyday burning of the bush. The bush was burning in Ferguson before Michael Brown was killed. The bush is burning in Baltimore before the police corruption was discovered. Bush was burning in Florida before Trayvon Martin went to get Skittles and tea. Bush was burning in New York way back when Amadou Diallo was killed. Bush was burning in Chicago before they shut down Michigan Avenue. The bush was burning in Cleveland before Tamir Rice got to the playground. The bush was burning in Flint before we found out the water was contaminated. As a matter of fact, it's more contaminated in Cleveland, and we haven't even turned to look at that bush. Bush was burning in Palestine before it became fashionable to protest. Bushes are burning in Guatemala, in India. And God is as present in these places as God was with Moses. The question is, are we willing to turn aside? So Paul, when he hears, he turns aside. When he sees this light shining so brightly on the road, he doesn't try to dismiss it. He doesn't close his eyes and hope it'll go away. He turns aside. Where on this road of life does the light of Christ shine so brightly for you that you cannot turn away? You must turn aside. God's voice caused Saul to change direction, and Saul got a total change in his life that day. The voice from heaven showed him that the life that he knew was to be over, and God has singled him out for a brand new thing, because once we see, we cannot unsee. The reality is, if you and I really listen to God's voice, we're not going to always like what we hear. Well, sorry. It's not going to always be John 3:16. That would be nice. Not going to always hear Psalm 23. Talking with God may change our attitudes and our altitudes. Talking with God may change our actions. And just in case you don't get it, let me just give you what I call on Facebook a freebie. Beware of the voice that always agrees with you. Chances are it ain't God. The voice of God is a pressing voice, always calling us closer, always pushing us farther. The question is, are we willing to interrupt our daily doings to bear witness to the divine in new ways? Are we willing to tell the story of Christ even when it turns out not to be the story we signed up to tell? The Bible says, scales formed on the eyes of Saul. What are these scales all about? There's a saying that you cannot teach a person new things if they already know everything. I heard conference ministers speaking out then. God's voice comes in a recognizable form, and I like the passage in Acts 26 where Paul looks back and remembers that the Lord spoke to him in Aramaic. This was Paul's mother tongue. He knew multiple languages, but the voice came to him in his mother tongue. Jesus knows exactly how to get the point across. God chooses different ways to speak to different people. What is clear to you may not be clear to somebody else. The men with Saul heard the sound, but they didn't understand the voice. They saw the light, but they didn't see anyone in the light. This is why two people can come to church and have two totally different experiences. This is why some of you will leave here today and say, wow, that was a good sermon, and then others of you will leave and say, what the hell was she talking about? I just built myself a little grace in there. God speaks to each of us in ways that we can hear, and often our willingness to hear God, to really listen, does not initially leave us with greater knowing, but a greater awareness of how much we do not know. And that's okay. Those are the scales. It's wonderful, actually, because coming to the end of ourselves is when we get to the beginning of God. Paul was converted on that Damascus road from a defender to a dependent, from a leader to a servant. And now God can use him instead of Saul using God. You see, when God uses you, you act in love. But when you use God, you'll take God's messages and try to denigrate other people. It's the humbleness and the honesty and the submission, yes, the submission that allows us to bear witness to the power of God. So guess what, friends? Following God's voice may leave you by yourself. This part isn't nearly as fun as the idea of God giving you a message and everybody following you out of Egypt. But we in the United Church of Christ know something about the cost of conversion. There have been many times in our public and private witness when we've been called by God to stand on the side of the few. The United Church of Christ has stood against racism even as we struggle with racism on the inside.
Amen.
We have stood against sexism in God's way, declaring that God does not always speak in baritone. And we've been doing that long before most mainline pulpits began to preach in harmony. We stood against heterosexism, even when he called some churches to leave. And we stand against Palestinian occupation and for the preservation of Israel simultaneously, even when many want us to choose. Listening to God's voice is not an easy life. Paul was beaten and whipped and shipwrecked and abandoned and nearly stoned to death, and we get pissed off because somebody doesn't like our Facebook post. God did not sign us up for a life of ease. And I'm sorry to tell you, God does not call just one time. I know the Bible will make you think that you've done your duty, right? Not. You see, the call to conversion is not an event, it's a lifestyle. We must remain in a listening mode, and as we listen, the scales are cleared from our eyes, and we have lots of scales. But as we listen, they begin to fall off and we begin to see, and having seen, we cannot unsee. You see, God's voice is a sudden and a gradual revelation. The Lord spoke to Saul that day and told him some of what he would face as a believer. But this is not the last time God spoke to Saul. God continued to give guidance and direction for the rest of his life. Paul later talked about how the Spirit guided him to go this way or that. He told later of God's answers to prayers. Paul listened to God's voice even after the first time, and guess what? We know because of some of the crazy stuff he wrote that he still made some mistakes. Amen. So how about you? When was the last time you listened for the voice of the Lord in your life? Have you let the Lord speak to you lately? What is your willingness to listen and learn from those whose life's experiences are different than yours? How is becoming aware of our blindness necessary if we're going to have a new vision? You see, I heard God speaking in the Middle East. In the Middle East, we learned of a Muslim family. This is like really an embarrassing story, but I'm going to tell you. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the real holy place, built on Calvary, where somehow they say this is the place where Jesus was actually crucified. And less than a stone throw, they say this is the tomb where he got up. Just in case you don't believe that, there's another tomb down the street where they say he got up. The good news is that they're both empty. But in this church that houses different chapels for 5 different denominations, all Christian denominations, by the way, where they actively worship, not just on Sundays, but all during the week, the story goes that the denominations could not get together enough to decide who could have the key. Because if you have the key, you have more power. And the churches couldn't agree on who could hold the key. We've never experienced anything like that, have we? So a decision was made to let a Muslim family hold the key. And they made that decision 200 years ago. And the Muslim family still has the key. So every day, this key, it passes in this one Muslim family from father to son, generation after generation, and every day, every single day, not just Sundays, that son gets up and goes and unlocks the Church of the Holy Sepulchre early in the morning so Christians can worship. And at the end of every day, he goes and he locks the Church of the Holy Sepulchre so that everything is safe for 200 years. They've never missed a day. And they don't even believe. That's better than our record. I know that must be God speaking. I heard God speaking, reminding me that God is bigger than my preconceived notions, no matter how well-intended they may be. I heard God speaking in a conversation that Jim and I actually had, with young Israeli female soldiers who were guarding Hebron with military weapons. We took a chance. We're here, so we made it. They shared with us their hopes and their dreams for peace and how they wanted the fighting to end. I heard God speaking in a Syrian refugee camp, the one where we went to give out care packages and dignity packages, when the men of that camp came out having made coffee for us. Instantly reminding me that there's a difference between being impoverished and being poor. And in a moment, we were serving one another out of our abundance. Where do you hear God speaking? I know it's a cute slogan, but are you listening? I hear God speaking on the streets of Ferguson when young people chant Black Lives Matter. They don't chant this as a diminishment of anyone's life, but as a recognition of all life, including lives that are most marginalized. They are not saying, don't see other folk. They're just saying, please see me. I hear God speaking in the communities of Flint as churches and communities are coming together to stand in the gap for those brutalized by capitalism and environmental racism. I always try to make this point when I speak now. Don't pat yourself on the back because we sent some bottles of water to Flint. Bottles of water are not justice. We're in the justice business. Bottles of water are charity, and we are called to be charitable. But we cannot stop fighting for justice. And in a place where you can't even get clean water, we're gonna have to figure out how to get all of that plastic out of there that we've been sending week after week after week. I hear God speaking in the national office as we spend time listening together for God's direction. And as we discern God's direction for the best stewardship of our collective resources, resources that are not what they used to be. And yet we are called to do more work with less. I hear God speaking in this place, where on a beautiful day, there are over 500 of you gathered together to discern God's next call of conversion for your conference, and I am encouraged. Life is filled with Damascus Road experiences crafted by God to help us reimagine our understanding of God, our understanding of God's people, and our understanding of our purpose. Paul's conversion on Damascus Road was indicative of what God desires to do over and over and over again in our lives. Because once you see, you cannot. And once you hear, you cannot. The Spirit is speaking, my friends. Let those who have ear, let us hear. Amen.
Okay, put that in the B-roll.
Okay.